For a decade and a half, the Toyota Hiace has been one of the best-selling vans in the Philippine market. It's not really hard to see why. It's big, it's spacious, and it's very, very practical. Oh, and it's reliable too. That's probably why it's always imitated, but never really duplicated. Now Toyota Motor Philippines has an all-new model, and they actually held the world premiere of this van right here in the Philippines just a few months ago. They've handed us the keys to this. It's the GL Grandia Tourer. It's the biggest one of the bunch. It's longer, wider, and taller than any other Hiace we've ever seen before. And we're gonna see how this big boy drives right here, right now on AutoIndustriya.com. But before we go and take it out for a drive, let's first take a look at how this Hiace looks. The version they sent us is the GL Grandia Tourer. It's the most expensive and the biggest one of the Hiace range. Now, the biggest change that they made, apart from the size, is the fact that it now has a hood. Yeah, the engine sits there, and it kind of changes the dynamic of how this van performs and rides on a daily basis. We'll get to that later. But first, the things you need to know, well, you have two doors in front, as always. You only have one sliding door on the side. You don't have one on the left side, and I guess that's pretty much for safety. There's also a big tailgate in the back, which when you open it, can expose a large cargo area, or you can fold down the seats so you have the maximum seating capacity in this Hiace, which is 14. Let me tell you now that vans aren't exactly meant to be pretty things. So the fact that Toyota gave it a bit of design flair is nice, but what we're really more interested in is what's inside and how it can change the way you drive or the way you ride. The cabin of the Hiace is actually quite big. Now, there is one criticism right up front, and that's the fact that if you're 5'5" or taller, you might not be able to stand up straight in here, even with this semi-high roof configuration. It's not high enough, really, for that. So you will have to bend your neck or crouch a bit if you're that height or taller. Now, there are some nice leather seats here for this model, which actually they're quite comfortable. They're nicely padded. You've got an armrest for each and every aisle seat. You've got this nice, well, pretty much aisle here that you can walk on. You know, you may have to scooch a bit to be able to fit in between, but it's not too bad. Also, the configuration of the cabin is not exactly, it's not something we would call family friendly like you would see in a minivan, or definitely not, you know, very executive or business class like the Alphard. This is more like an executive shuttle more than anything else. And that's okay, especially if you're a corporate customer looking for a vehicle to shuttle your, you know, managers and VPs around. This is perfect. If you're a family, well, it might not work for you if you have a lot of, you know, little kids running around. But if you have to ferry 14 people around, well, you will like the Hiace, especially if your family is that big. So we're now aboard the all-new 6th generation Toyota Hiace. The version we're riding in is the GL Grandia Tourer. It's the most massive one of the lot. This one measures almost 6 meters long. Now, to put that in perspective, a couple of years ago, Toyota came up with the Hiace LXB. It's stretched and it's got a higher roof. But that was only just under 5.4 meters. This, by comparison, is much longer, but it's also much wider. This one almost measures in at 2 meters wide. So keeping it in the lane on the expressway is not a problem, but in city streets, that could be an issue for some drivers. Right now, it's actually also all right. I mean, the lane here on the NLEX is actually quite wide. It's meant to accommodate trucks. So a big van like the Hiace, the GL Grandia Tour, it's a perfect fit for this kind of a road. The biggest difference with the GL Grandia Tour versus the previous models is that the engine is now in front. Now, what does that mean? It means you actually now have a crumple zone, which definitely enhances overall crash safety. But the other big thing is that it locates the engine, which it's the biggest source of vibration in any van, especially a diesel van, a bit further away from the driver. And if you've also driven a van before which has the engine underneath, you know how hot it can get on longer drives. That can get quite uncomfortable for the driver, and it also makes getting in and out a bit more challenging because there's a big lump that your seat actually rests on top of. So I'm glad that they moved that engine further ahead. They can make it, they can improve the noise deadening, they can improve the comfort for the driver and the front passengers. So that can only be a good thing for a van like this, especially one that's geared for longer road trips like we're on now. Powering the Hiace GL Grandia Tour, yeah, it's a mouthful, is a 2.8 liter turbo diesel engine. It's actually one of Toyota's better turbo diesels, and it makes 163 horsepower and 420 newton meters of torque from about 1,400 RPM. It's pretty low. So you've got your maximum torque already available to you at that low of an RPM, which you would need for a van like this. What we do find strange is that the GL Grandia Tour, being the biggest model in the bunch, is actually not the most powerful or the torquiest. For some reason, Toyota gave the torquier version of the same turbo diesel to the GL Grandia. That's unusual. But nevertheless, this one has a 6-speed automatic, and it even has a manual mode. Now, that'll be interesting to use. It'll be fun to use if you're on a bit of a winding road, but it's not gonna be, say, that easy with a big van like this. Now, I can tell you that the ride is improved. The handling is actually a lot better. Though, if you're familiar with, the older Hiace, then you will have to compensate for the driving style, given that the wheels are now in front. Before, it used to be underneath. So when you turn, you actually look right outside the window in order to make that turn, because your pivot point is right under here. Now it's right in front. So if you're used to driving a sedan or any passenger car or an SUV, then that will seem very familiar. The learning curve isn't that big. But if you're used to a van, then you will have to readjust back to having the wheels up in front. Beyond the mechanical and engineering improvements, you can easily tell that the GL Grandia Tour is a lot better on the longer drive, simply by small touches that Toyota made to make it a lot better for comfort and convenience. For one, you've got a dual AC system. We've got the main AC right here, and a rear cooler right up there that you can control here, or you can control with the control panel over there. It's a lot better than the older model, I tell you, but what I do feel they should have done, they should have made the vents on the ceiling for the rear passengers a little bit bigger. It can get a bit warm because this is a big vehicle and it needs better cooling for especially for our summers, and if you have a full cabin. Imagine how many 37-degree human beings you can put in here. You can put 14. So you have to take that into account. But I guess you can offset it with a bit of light tinting. But as it is now, it can be a bit warm if we turn the AC down to more quiet levels. It can get a bit noisy with the AC system, but it's not too bad. Now, you've also got a lot of cup holders and bottle holders all around you. They tried to make the Hiace a lot more practical in that sense. So, for example, I've got a bottle slash cup holder here. It's right next to the AC vent, which makes a lot of sense, especially if you're having to keep a drink cool for a long drive, or if you want to cool down a cup of coffee for a short one. You've got cup holders there, bottle holders, cup holders here as well, a big tray here. Every seat back in the rear actually has a bottle holder or a cup holder there on the backrest. For those of you who have to have some electronics, well, the Hiace GL Grandia Tour is actually quite smart in that sense because, well, you've got a 2-DIN AVT touchscreen audio unit right here. It's got your typical Bluetooth, your radio, of course, and the USB input. But what they did enhance with this model is that they put charging ports, USB charging ports, for each row actually. So here you've got charging ports down there, you've got your 12-volt socket up here, and then in the second row, third row, and fourth row, there are actually a pair of USB ports so you can charge your phone on the go. In the very back, there's no charging port, sorry. But it's nice to know that Toyota took that into account when they were engineering the cabin space of the GL Grandia Tour. It means, of course, if you're transporting kids, they can keep their phones charged. You know, they can go online without having to bring out any kind of power bank. What I do wish Toyota did put in here was, I wish they put in a 240 or 220 volt charger, because it'll be useful if you have a laptop, because you can't exactly charge a laptop on a USB port now, can you? It's hard to actually say that we're impressed by a van because, after all, it's a people carrier. Not like a car or an SUV or a sports car. They're meant to surprise you and impress you with the way they drive. The Grandia, however, it changes the game for vans quite a bit. And it's not just about putting that engine in the front and slapping a hood on it. It's a lot better in many different ways. Fuel economy, it achieved 13.5 kilometers per liter on the highway. Acceleration and power are actually quite decent for its size and for the amount of, well, the number of people we actually carried inside it on the way up here to Subic. Now, the drive, it's also a lot better. And surprisingly, for a big vehicle, the braking is also better. It's got disc brakes in the back and big rotors in the front, which actually is pretty good for a van. It can handle a lot more weight. I will say this though, do not expect Alphard levels of comfort with the Hiace Grandia, especially considering that it's priced at 2.22 million, well under the Alphard. But that's also a good thing for Toyota because it creates a distinction for between the Alphard and the Hiace, which is, again, much bigger. And where do we stand? The Toyota Hiace GL Grandia Tourer, it's a great van for everyday use. It's still a people carrier, and it's not really as family-oriented as a lot of the minivans out there. But for what its intended purpose is, the GL Grandia Tourer achieves it very well. This is Vince of AutoIndustriya, and if you like what we're doing here, subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter.